They were the first family launched into space on American television. 6 of the 8 core faces behind this cast are gone now. One was found dead in his own apartment after nearly a week alone. One invented an entire accent to escape the Bronx. And just months ago, the last living parent of this family left us at the age of 100. This is where they all ended up. Number 1 is June Lockhart, who played Dr. Maureen Robinson for 3 seasons and who, just months ago, became the very last living parent of the Robinson family to leave us. She was 40 when the show premiered, born June Kathleen Lockhart on June 25, 1925, in New York City, the daughter of Oscar-winning actor Gene Lockhart and actress Kathleen Lockhart. She made her stage debut at 8 in a Metropolitan Opera production, appeared on screen with her own parents in a 1938 film version of A Christmas Carol, and won a Tony Award in 1948 for her Broadway debut in For Love or Money, a performance the New York Times called enchanting. Long before Lost in Space, she guest starred across a string of classic westerns including Wagon Train and Gunsmoke, and had already spent 6 seasons as Ruth Martin on Lassie before Lost in Space ever called, taking over the role from Cloris Leachman. Here is what most fans never knew about her real passions. June always considered acting her craft, not her calling, her daughter later said. Journalism, politics, and science were what actually lit her up, and she was especially proud that Lost in Space had inspired real NASA astronauts, who would remind her of it on visits to the space agency. She was married twice, first to physician John F. Maloney, later to architect John Lindsay, divorced twice, and raised 2 daughters, including actress Anne Lockhart. On October 23, 2025, June Lockhart died of natural causes at her Santa Monica home, with her daughter and granddaughter at her bedside. She was 100 years old. A family friend said she stayed happy right until the end, reading the New York Times and the LA Times every single day because staying informed mattered to her more than almost anything else. She is buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City. Maureen Robinson held a stranded family together through 83 episodes of disaster. June Lockhart held together a 90-year career that ran from the Metropolitan Opera to NASA's own tribute reels, and died surrounded by the family she actually raised at exactly 100. Number 2 is Guy Williams, who played Professor John Robinson, the family's steady commander, and whose own final years were the loneliest true story this cast ever produced. He was 41 when the show premiered, born Armando Joseph Catalano on January 14, 1924, in New York City, already famous as Disney's Zorro before Lost in Space made him a father figure to millions. He stood 6'3", fenced with genuine skill, and co-star Bill Mumie nicknamed him The Comb because he groomed his hair between nearly every take. Here is the ending most viewers never knew. After the show, Williams grew increasingly private and eventually relocated to Buenos Aires, Argentina, where Zorro had made him a genuine national icon decades after American audiences had moved on. Argentine fans treated him less like a retired actor and more like a returning hero, and he embraced the adoration he no longer found at home. He lived quietly in an upscale Recoleta apartment, largely retired except for occasional appearances, seeing almost no one. He was last seen alive on April 30, 1989. Neighbors began noticing a smell days later. Police entered his apartment and found him dead of a brain aneurysm. He had been gone for nearly a week before anyone realized. He was 65, still legally married to Janice Cooper since 1948, though they had long since divorced, survived by their 2 children, Stephen and Tony. His ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean off Malibu. In 2001, more than a decade after his death, fan petitions to the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce finally earned him a posthumous star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Professor Robinson was the commander who never let his family panic in the face of danger. Guy Williams was a beloved international icon whose own danger arrived in complete silence, and whose neighbors were the only ones who eventually noticed he was gone. Number 3 is Jonathan Harris, who played the fussy, scheming Dr. Zachary Smith, and who built the voice that made him famous entirely out of an accent he was not born with. He was 50 when the show premiered, born Jonathan Daniel Cherasuchin on November 6, 1914, in the Bronx, New York City. Dr. Smith had been written as a disposable one-season villain meant to be killed off early. Harris turned every line into theater, stretching vowels and rolling his eyes, until the writers had no choice but to build the whole show around him instead. Here is the secret behind that voice. Jonathan hated the accent he grew up with, studied British B-movies as a boy, and taught himself an entirely invented upper-crust English lilt, developing along with it a genuine love of Shakespeare, Latin, and Romantic poetry. He earned a pharmacology degree from Fordham University and briefly worked in drugstores before changing his last name to Harris and heading for Hollywood, where he built a career of roughly 500 television episodes, including a memorable turn playing Charles Dickens on Bonanza, and appearances on The Twilight Zone and The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. After Lost in Space ended, he taught drama. One student was a young Chuck Norris, who credited Harris with correcting his diction by literally sticking his fingers down Norris's throat. In November 2002, Harris was preparing to reprise Dr. Smith one final time for a TV movie meant to give the series real closure. An undetected blood clot reached his heart first. He died on November 3, 2002, 3 days before his 88th birthday. The project was canceled before a single scene was filmed. Dr. Smith was a coward who talked his way out of every disaster the show ever wrote. Jonathan Harris invented an entire voice, an entire persona, and an entire life out of a Bronx accent he refused to keep, and ran out of time 3 days before finishing the one story he still wanted to tell. Number 4 is Marta Kristen, who played the composed eldest daughter Judy Robinson, and whose actual childhood began in a war most fans never think to ask about. She was 20 when the show premiered. Judy was written as the level-headed Robinson daughter, briefly a romantic interest for Major West. Off-camera, Kristen had already survived something no script could have invented. Here is the history most viewers never knew. Born Birgitte Annalisa Rusanen on February 26, 1945, in Oslo, Norway, Marta was what history calls a war child, the daughter of a Finnish mother and a German soldier father killed in the Second World War, during the Lapland War fought between Finland and Nazi Germany in the war's final chaotic months. Fearing what that lineage would mean for her daughter growing up, her mother gave her up rather than let her carry it. Birgitte spent her earliest years in a Norwegian orphanage before an American professor and his wife from Detroit adopted her in 1949 and renamed her Martha Annalise Soderquist. She moved to Los Angeles as a teenager, graduated from Santa Monica High School, and was nearly cast as the lead nymphette in Lolita before her adoptive parents refused to let her take the role, sending the part instead to Sue Lyon, whose own life afterward would prove just as difficult as Kristen's parents had feared. She had already appeared in a 1961 Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode alongside a young Bill Mumie, years before either knew they would one day share a spaceship together. She married twice. Her second husband, Kevin Kane, died in 2016 after 38 years together. She has one child. Today, at 81, she still occasionally acts and coaches young performers. Judy Robinson was the composed daughter who kept her head steady through every alien crisis the family faced. Marta Kristen kept her own head steady through a real war, a real orphanage, and a stolen childhood most of her fans will never read about. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, which member of the Robinson family or crew stayed with you the longest? The professor, the robot, or Dr. Smith? I read every single reply and I try to answer as many as I can. And if you're enjoying this one, take a second to subscribe. Verifying stories like Argentina, Norway, and the Bronx takes real research, and that subscription is genuinely what keeps this channel able to keep doing it. Number 5 is Mark Goddard, who played the hot-tempered Major Don West, and who spent nearly 6 decades of real friendship with the boy he once protected on screen. He was 29 when the show premiered, born Charles Harvey Goddard on July 24, 1936, in Lowell, Massachusetts, the youngest of 5 children, raised in Scituate, where his father owned a general store. He was already a familiar face from Johnny Ringo and the Detectives, and he appeared in films like The Monkey's Uncle alongside Annette Funicello, and A Rage to Live alongside Suzanne Plachette during that same era. He worried for years that Lost in Space had typecast him permanently as a space show actor, a label he fought against for most of his career. Here is what most viewers never knew about how that friendship ended. Goddard worked hard to diversify after the show. Soap operas, including One Life to Live and General Hospital. Procedural guest spots on Barnaby Jones, Petrocelli, and the Streets of San Francisco. Decades of steady character work. And stayed close with Bill Mumy the entire time, reuniting for cameos in the 1998 Lost in Space film and appearances tied to the Netflix reboot that ran from 2018 to 2021. On October 10, 2023, Mark Goddard died in Hingham, Massachusetts, of pulmonary fibrosis at age 87. Mumie wrote a public tribute calling him a beloved friend and brother, revealing the two had spoken by phone on Goddard's 87th birthday just months before, and that their final words to each other were simply, "I love you." Don West was the pilot who kept the Jupiter 2 steady through every disaster. Mark Goddard kept a real friendship steady for 59 years, right up until one final phone call neither of them knew would be their last. Number 6 is The Robot, or rather the two men who built him, Bob May and Dick Tufeld, who split a single beloved character in half, and neither one ever quite got equal credit for his share of it. Bob May was born September 4th, 1939 in New York City, and had already been performing in vaudeville since age 2 and working as a stuntman on westerns like Cheyenne and Stagecoach before he was cast inside the fiberglass robot suit, a costume so heavy its upper half alone weighed 250 pounds and needed several crew members just to attach it before every scene. His short stature was exactly what let him fit inside the machine at all, and he operated it for entire shooting days in stifling California heat, giving the robot its physical comedy, its singing, its guitar playing, and its panic purely through movement no one could see was human underneath. Dick Tufeld, born December 11, 1926, in Los Angeles to a Russian father and a Canadian mother, provided the voice from outside the suit entirely and never once appeared on camera. He trained at Northwestern University before becoming one of the busiest announcers in television, working for producer Irwin Allen on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and The Time Tunnel, alongside Lost in Space, and spending over 30 years as a daytime ABC announcer, in addition to narrating Grammy and Emmy broadcasts. He was married to his wife Adrienne from 1948 until her death in 2004, and had 4 children. Neither man ever met the other's half of the audience's affection in quite the way the character himself received both. Bob May died of congestive heart failure on January 18, 2009, in Lancaster, California, at 69. Dick Tufeld, who had voiced the robot again for the 1998 feature film, using the exact same voice fans remembered instantly, died of heart disease in Los Angeles on January 22, 2012, following a decline after a fall the year before. He was 85, buried at Mount Sinai Memorial Park. The robot could not feel fear, and somehow made an entire generation feel it anyway. Bob May and Dick Tufeld spent years building a single beloved machine out of 2 invisible men, one giving it a body no one could see, the other a voice no one could forget. Number 7 is Bill Mumy, who played the brilliant Will Robinson and who is now, by his own admission, more famous for a song about fish heads than for anything he ever did in space. He was 10 when the show premiered, born Charles William Mumy Jr. on February 1, 1954, in San Gabriel, California, the son of a cattle rancher, already a veteran of 3 Twilight Zone episodes and the 1965 film Dear Bridget, opposite James Stewart and Brigitte Bardot. Here is the second act most fans never expected. After Lost in Space, Mumie formed a musical duo called Barnes and Barnes with childhood friend Robert Hamer, and in 1978 released a novelty song called Fish Heads, which became a cult phenomenon on the Dr. Demento radio show and remains one of its most requested tracks decades later. A cult music career most casual fans of the show have absolutely no idea exists. He married childbirth educator Eileen Joy Davis in 1986, and they have 2 children, Seth and Liliana, both of whom became actors themselves. He went on to play Lanier across all 5 seasons of Babylon 5, was nominated for a Daytime Emmy for composing music on Adventures in Wonderland, and continues releasing solo albums into his 70s. Will Robinson was the boy whose life depended on a robot's warning cry. Bill Mumy built a permanent creative life out of his own childhood stardom, one where a song about fish heads has somehow outlived nearly every serious role he ever played. Number 8 is Angela Cartwright, who played the youngest Robinson daughter, Penny, and who spent 1965 quietly starring in 2 of the most beloved productions of the decade at the exact same time. She was 13 when Lost in Space premiered, born Angela Margaret Cartwright on September 9, 1952, in Altrincham, England, the same year she appeared as Brigitte von Trapp in The Sound of Music, released that March, months before Lost in Space landed on CBS that September. Here is the connection most viewers never put together. Angela had already spent 7 seasons as a regular on The Danny Thomas Show before either role, having started acting professionally at age 3 opposite Paul Newman in Somebody Up There Likes Me, and later appearing alongside Rock Hudson and Sidney Poitier in Something of Value, before she had even lost her baby teeth. Her family had moved from England to Los Angeles by way of Canada when she was just a year old. She is the younger sister of actress Veronica Cartwright, star of Alien. After marrying producer Steve Gullion in 1976 and raising 2 children, Angela stepped back from acting and reinvented herself as a respected photographer and author, co-writing 2 books with Bill Mumy and returning for a cameo in the Netflix reboot alongside June Lockhart, years before Lockhart's own passing. She is 73 today and still creating. Penny Robinson was the middle child forever collecting strange space creatures no one else wanted. Angela Cartwright spent 1 single year singing in the Alps and drifting through the stars simultaneously, and turned the 6 decades since into a career built entirely behind the camera instead of in front of it. The Jupiter 2 launched into television history on September 15, 1965, and the family that flew it is now scattered between memory and living rooms. Guy Williams rests in the Pacific Ocean off Malibu, decades removed from the country that made him famous twice. Jonathan Harris was laid to rest 3 days before what would have been his 88th birthday, the closure he was chasing left unfinished. Bob May and Dick Tufeld, the 2 men who gave the robot its body and its voice, are both gone. Neither one ever fully credited with the other's half of the character. Mark Goddard rests in Massachusetts, closer to the high school ball fields where he once dreamed of a different career entirely. And June Lockhart, the last living Robinson parent, was laid to rest just months ago at Holy Cross Cemetery, 100 years after she was born in New York City. But Bill Mumy is still writing music, Marta Kristen is still coaching young performers, and Angela Cartwright is still behind a camera, 60 years after she first stood in front of one. Danger Will Robinson was only ever meant as a warning. For most of this family, the real danger arrived long after the cameras stopped rolling, and 3 of them are still here to tell you about it.